Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Morse, and I'm a librarian on South Campus and a member of the Civic Engagement Team. This event is being recorded, and by staying, you agreed to have recordings made of any chat comments that are published. On behalf of the District Civic Engagement Team, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Jim Baxter, who is here to speak on fake news, information pollution, digital literacy, and elections. Jim Baxter is the Assistant Director of Library Services at Tarrant County College Northwest Campus. Jim has been with TCC for 12 years. He earned his Master of Library Science degree from the University of North Texas in 1998, and he has worked for community college libraries for 20 years. Before he was awarded his MLS, Jim earned a bachelor's degree in mass communication with a journalism emphasis from Texas Wesleyan University. He has worked as a reporter, technical writer, and textbook copy editor. Over the last 5 years, Jim has taught workshops on fake news and information literacy for TCC Northwest instructors who teach in a wide variety of academic disciplines. He is passionate about information literacy, and he hopes to increase your interest and knowledge in this very timely subject today. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A channel, and we will ask Jim to answer them at the conclusion of his presentation. Thank you, and now to you, Jim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Angela, for the introduction, and I want to thank the Civic Engagement Committee for inviting me to speak to you today. I hope you will find the next hour informative and useful. We're going to be talking about the phenomenon commonly known as fake news and ways we can deal with it in our efforts to become more digitally literate, and how digital literacy is increasingly important to democratic elections. We'll be discussing some of the information problems the internet presents for us, some ways to handle those problems, and then I'll share with you some suggestions for finding good voter and election information as well. I grew up here in North Texas, so I'm not the fastest speaker in the world, but I'll do my best to get as much information to you as I can in the next hour. And no matter how fast I may speak, we will have question and answer time at the end. I hope this presentation sparks some questions in you, and you will share those questions with us. If you ask a question that I don't have an answer for, I will find an answer and email it to you, because that's what we librarians love to do. Okay, we'll dive right in. Because of the internet, there are almost endless sources of news and information today, but the quality control measures that were common in the days of print news are not always in place. Anyone can publish anything on the web at any time. The gatekeepers, the writers and editors who endeavored to ensure good information made its way to us are often not there to protect us in the online environment. In effect, it's like the referees have left the field while the game is still in progress, and it's up to each one of us to referee the game for ourselves. There is a lot of great journalism produced by professional journalists on the web. Major newspapers and news magazines have tremendously useful and informative websites. And libraries, like ours at TCC, offer access to thousands of magazines, journals, newspapers, and ebooks from trusted sources. Very many Americans these days, though, myself included, get a lot of our news and information from social media. This information comes to us through memes, blog posts, the comments section on media posts, fake news websites, and sometimes fake accounts built by trolls. Social media often brings us low-grade and just plain false information. The producers of this information are almost always anonymous, and unlike professional journalists, they almost never suffer any consequences when they're wrong, as they quite often are. Dictionary.com added the term fake news to their online dictionary in 2017. They define fake news as false news stories, often of a sensational nature, created to be widely shared or distributed for the purpose of generating revenue or promoting or discrediting a public figure, political movement, company, etc. Information literacy experts tell us that fake news is really not the best term to use for this kind of information. Fake news means different things to different people. It's become a highly politicized term, and often the information it attempts to describe is not really news at all. This definition also alludes to the concept of clickbait, and we'll be talking about clickbait a little bit later. News and advertising have always been linked, but clickbait brings us some special problems, and we'll be looking into those issues. There is nothing new about fake news. Uh, Lessons from the fake news pandemic of 1942 from Politico.com. I like to share this story because it provides a good historical example of fake news. Fake news has always been with us. Right after the American Revolution, politicians in the newly minted United States published pamphlets that denigrated their political opponents, often with outright lies. Of course, those simple pamphlets had only a minuscule reach compared to the audience the internet commands today. This article on the Politico.com website describes the fake news that spread all through the southern states shortly after the U.S. entered World War II, early in 1942. Rumors spread from the Carolinas to Louisiana that the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, was secretly traveling through the South, forming so-called, quote, Eleanor clubs, meeting with Black women who were domestic workers in white homes, and encouraging those women to walk off of their jobs. The motto of the Eleanor clubs was purportedly, quote, a white woman in the kitchen by 1943. Another track of rumors had it that when all the white men went off to war, all the Black men in the South were going to stage a huge race riot and take over the entire South. And this made no sense because Black men from the South went to war just as white men from the South did. But that made no difference to the spread of these rumors. In Charleston, South Carolina, rumor had it that African-American men were stockpiling ice picks. In Memphis, they were supposedly ordering huge amounts of rifles and pistols from the Sears Roebuck catalog. Of course, there wasn't a shred of evidence to support these rumors, but they spread like wildfire anyway. Shamefully, even a few regional Southern newspapers printed these rumors, again, with no supporting evidence whatsoever. There was a sociologist at the University of North Carolina at this time named Howard Odom. Being a white Southerner, he heard these rumors, and being a sociologist, he decided to study them. He hired a team of researchers, and together they interviewed thousands of people and cataloged the rumors in a book, which you can still buy on Amazon today, titled Race and Rumors of Race, The American South in the Early 40s. And he did this to shine a light on these malignant rumors. I think the big takeaway in this story for us living in the annus horribilis of 2020 is that fake news, misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, all these negative kinds of communication tend to flourish and spread in stressful times. 1942 was certainly a stressful year. At that point, the US was losing the war in the Pacific, and Hitler was still in control over all of Europe and North Africa. And the United States was still in the throes of the Great Depression. I think most of us would say we're living in stressful times currently. We're experiencing the worst viral pandemic in over 100 years. More Americans are out of work now than at any other time since the Great Depression. Fake news flourishes and spreads in stressful times. Just being aware of that fact can help us fight it. While fake news has always been with us, what's different and dangerous now about it is just the sheer staggering volume of it and the speed at which it travels. Both of those facts are due, of course, to the internet. And here's the front cover of Odom's book from Amazon.com. The social psychologists Gordon W. Allport and Leo Postman once wrote that rumor is most frenzied when the public is expecting a momentous event to occur. Like the South in 1942, we're living in a time of demographic, social, and economic change. Change is stressful, and stress can lead to the creation and spread of fake news. Information pollution is the term that's growing in acceptance to describe the bad information we find on the web today. It's more inclusive and descriptive than the term fake news. I'm trying to use information pollution more. It's kind of a tough change because we're also used to fake news. But information pollution really does describe our information problem better than the term fake news. Just as the Industrial Revolution that began in England and the United States in the late 18th century brought environmental pollution, the information revolution brought about by the advent of the internet has brought us information pollution. And we see a good definition of information pollution here. It's the contamination of the information supply with irrelevant, redundant, unsolicited, hampering, and low-value information. The spread of useless and undesirable information can have a detrimental effect on human activities. It is considered one of the adverse effects of the information revolution. And this definition comes to us from the Journal of Management Information Systems. So we don't want to fall prey to fake news and information pollution. What we want to strive for is digital literacy. And here's a good definition of digital literacy from the American Library Association. Digital literacy is the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information, requiring both cognitive and technical skills. From this, we understand that being digitally literate has two components: the ability to use technology to find information and the cognitive ability to evaluate that information. Most of our students today are quite proficient end users of computer technology. It's the information evaluation part of digital literacy that many students and many Americans in general are having some issues with. To get a better idea of American students' digital literacy skills, the Stanford History Education Group did a groundbreaking study in 2016. They assessed over 8,000 students in 12 states across the US. The students ranged in age from middle schoolers through college. The researchers were concerned with what they found. They conducted another study in 2019 and recorded similar findings. This quote is from the executive summary of their 2019 study, and I think it underlines the importance of information evaluation skills. A polluted information supply imperils our nation's civic health. Just as drinkable water is important to public health, information supply is important to civic health. Democracy depends upon a well-informed citizenry. These are the stakes. If we don't really know what problems our country is facing, we won't find the right solutions. Bad information leads to bad decisions, and certainly in this election year, we want to be as well-informed as possible. So from June 2018 to May 2019, the Stanford History Education Group assessed 3,446 students, a national sample that matches the demographic profile of high school students in the US. The 6 exercises in the assessment gauge students' ability to evaluate digital sources on the open internet. This slide and the next shows some of the findings that concern the researchers. 52% of students believed a video claiming to show ballot stuffing in the 2016 Democratic primaries constituted strong evidence of voter fraud in the US. Only 3 out of more than 3,000 students tracked down the source of the video, even though a quick web search turns up lots of articles exposing the deception. 2/3 of the students couldn't tell the difference between news stories and ads when examining an article on the Slate website. Students displayed a tendency to accept websites at face value. 96% of students did not consider why ties between a climate change website and the fossil fuel industry might lessen that website's credibility. Instead of investigating who was responsible for the site, students focused on superficial markers of credibility, like the site's aesthetics or how it portrayed itself on the About page. 90% of the students received no credit on 4 of the 6 tasks. So students, the Stanford History Education folks tell us that when many of you graduate from high school, you're coming to us in your first year of college with some digital literacy needs. And for professors and my fellow librarians, this is an area where we really need to help our students. In our efforts to become more digitally literate, there are 2 terms that's very important for us to understand: misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation is a subset of misinformation. The difference between the 2 is intent. Misinformation is unintentional, accidental. Disinformation is intentional. Disinformation is much more pernicious because it is manipulative and deceptive. It's designed to deceive. Some information shared by Vanna Hari, the popular blogger better known as the Food Babe, shows us some good examples of misinformation. In one Food Babe blog post, she mistakenly warned her readers that many beers have an additive that is also found in antifreeze. The chemical she referred to, propylene glycol, is found in antifreeze. The chemical beer makers use, though, is propylene glycol alginate. Propylene glycol alginate is derived from kelp, seaweed, completely natural, 100% safe. Very similar names, very different chemicals. The food babe is not a nutritionist, nor is she a dietitian, and she doesn't have any training in chemistry. She certainly didn't intend to misinform her readers. It makes her look bad when she gets it wrong. She just didn't have the background or knowledge to share good information with her readers. Some scientists also accuse her of being a fearmonger, and you can read about that in this article on the NPR website. By contrast, this fake Twitter profile gives us a very good example of disinformation. It comes to us from spotthetroll.org, which is a website created by Clemson University. And professors, I encourage you to share spotthetroll.org with your students. I think it'd make for a great classroom activity. The site gives visitors the opportunity to view Twitter accounts and vote whether or not they think each account is authentic. The account featured here is not. When you visit the site and take the quiz, you can scroll down and see that, quote, Chloe is tweeting about a horse that died as a result of a chemical spill in Centerville, Louisiana. The chemical spill never happened, and this is a fake Twitter account. This fake profile was created by the Russian Internet Research Agency. The Internet Research Agency is a Russian troll farm, and they're most definitely guilty of spreading disinformation. In fact, that's their entire reason for being, to spread disinformation and to foment chaos, not just here in the US, but in democratic countries around the world. They're guilty of interfering in democratic elections in Western nations and trying to stir up all kinds of trouble online. They use the Ukraine as kind of a test laboratory before applying the same methods to attacks on democratic societies in the West. Millions of Americans have interacted with phony profiles created by the Internet Research Agency and had no idea they were doing so. And often these profiles feature pictures of young women with extreme political views. That can be a tip-off for you. A little side note for you, our word disinformation comes from the Russian word desinformatsiya, coined by none other than Joseph Stalin. Disinformation, the trouble with memes. Millions of Americans get information from memes, and memes are very poor information sources. They're almost always produced anonymously for one thing. No one claims responsibility for their content, and they have no references or links for you to track down to verify the information they contain. The meme on this slide has been shared a few million times on various platforms since 2016. The stats are wrong, surely wrong by design. The whites killed by whites and whites killed by blacks figures have been switched, according to the FBI, an organization that actually does collect these kinds of statistics. 81% of whites killed in this country are killed by other whites, according to the FBI. African Americans only make up 13% of the total US population, so the blacks killed by police and whites killed by police figures are very deceptive as well. When we look at the bottom of the meme, we see the sources listed as Crime Statistics Bureau of San Francisco. There is no such entity as the Crime Statistics Bureau of San Francisco. The maker of this meme just slapped that on it to give it a false sense of credibility. If you do a Google search for Crime Statistics Bureau San Francisco, all you will find are images of this meme and fact-checking articles deconstructing it. Even the graphic of the young man holding a gun with his face covered is manipulative. It's intended to evoke fear. This is very definitely disinformation, information deliberately intended to deceive. And why in this case did the maker of this meme want to fool us, we might ask? Quite likely because they wanted to convince us of a false narrative for political and social reasons. They wanted to share and amplify a worldview that is not supported by evidence. That happens quite often on the web, certainly often on social media. Investigators tracked down this particular meme, and the earliest known instance of it on the web appeared on a Twitter account registered in Ireland. That Twitter account featured an altered swastika as a logo, and it contained this tagline, and I quote, "Should have listened to the Austrian chap with the funny little mustache. Having this information should give us a pretty clear idea of the reasons that this meme was created. Here is another intentionally misleading meme. The National Rifle Association did in fact ban guns from the floor of their convention the year this meme was circulated, but this meme does not explain why. Vice President Mike Pence was attending the convention that year, and the Secret Service asked NRA officials if they would ban guns for his safety, and the NRA agreed to do so. But just by looking at this meme, however, you would get the impression that the NRA banned guns from the convention just out of hypocrisy, but not the case. This example is certainly not as dark and pernicious as our previous example, but once again, this is an example of disinformation, information created and circulated with the intent to deceive. More disinformation on the web. This very interesting article on Wired.com tells the story about Greek teenagers in Velez, Macedonia, who made a lot of money publishing fake news before the 2016 election. Macedonia is a very poor country. The average monthly salary is $371. But Boris, as the writer calls him in this story, made $16,000 in the 2 months leading up to the 2016 presidential election by creating fake news articles. He made so much money, in fact, that he dropped out of high school and decided to create fake news full time. He was able to do this simply by collecting snippets of fake news stories around the web, cobbling them together, and then, very importantly, creating a clickbait headline to get readers to click and read the story. He created a Google AdSense account, featured Google ads on every page, and he got paid per click. He posted these stories on his personal Facebook page and on fake news websites he created, and his stories garnered a lot of clicks. This kind of information we must classify as disinformation. Boris certainly knew he was deceiving people. He knew he was spreading bad information on purpose. He and quite a few other young people made a lot of money this way, but the party is over now. Google got so many complaints about the fake news stories that they pulled his Google AdSense account, drying up his revenue stream. Fake news websites certainly still exist, though, and they're quite numerous, and many advertisers are all too happy to have their ads on those websites. And speaking of clickbait, do we all know what clickbait is? I'm sure you've heard the term. Clickbait can be outrageous stories or headlines or photos we find on the web. Their outrageous nature makes readers want to click, hence the term clickbait. And when we click, of course, we see the ads on the page, which is the whole point. Sadly, many reputable news websites like Newsweek.com or Time.com have clickbait ads at the bottom of the pages that contain very professional, reputable news stories. This can have the effect of lowering a reader's confidence in those news articles. More information, deepfake videos. The Pentagon is so concerned about national security issues around deepfake videos that they are now working with the University of Colorado at Denver to create deepfakes in order to better understand them so that we can recognize them when we encounter them online. This is a good article from CNN.com that describes this project. Researchers at the University of Washington have created a new tool that takes audio files, converts them into realistic mouth movements, and then graphs those movements onto existing video. The end result is a video of someone saying something that they didn't. This particular video has been around for a year or two now. There are even more advanced deceptive examples out there. But in this example, as we'll see here in a moment, the real audio goes with the video on the left. The software makes it appear that the audio goes with the fake video on the right, and it works like this.
You're absolutely right, Whoopi, that us showing respect for other people, us being thoughtful about other people's traditions is something that Michelle and I try to teach our kids. You talked about what we talk about over the dinner table. A lot of what we talk about over the dinner table is, we live in a diverse world, and
I'm honored, and I think people can say that my election symbolizes some progress, at least within the small confines of the legal community. I think it's real important to keep the focus on the broader world out there and see that for a lot of kids, the doors that have been open to me aren't open to them.
Okay, so you can see it's pretty convincing. Like I said, there are even newer and more convincing videos out there. That one's been around for a couple of years, but that kind of gives you the idea of what we're looking at with deep fakes. Okay, so this article was posted on CNN just yesterday. As fake news, information pollution is such an evolving topic that I could add slides to this PowerPoint literally every day and never run out of things to share with you. This article offers some tips for spotting deep fakes. I won't go into a lot of detail with it here, but I do recommend you check it out for yourself. A couple of the tips they share with us, though, are to watch for unnatural blinking patterns in deepfake videos. It's difficult for the software to replicate natural human blinking still at this point. Also, they tell us to pay attention to the lighting. If the lighting in the foreground doesn't match up with the lighting behind the subject of the video, you may be looking at a deepfake. There are a number of other good tips to watch for in this article. I highly recommend that you check it out. Unfortunately, though, the overriding issue may be that this advice on how to spot deep fakes may not make any difference to people who want to believe that a deep fake video is real. So what can we do about all this information pollution, all this deceptive information online? Here's a nice little list with some good advice for us. 1, read past the headline. As we discussed in the Macedonian fake news story, headlines today are often very clickbait-ish. They're often there more to garner clicks than to really describe the contents of the story. Check the news outlet that published the story. It's important, but it's not the be-all, end-all. Even mediocre news outlets get it right sometimes, but knowing where the story comes from definitely is important. Check the date and time of the publication. In some cases, the story you're reading may be outdated. Who's the author? Often you can't tell. Very often that's the case if you're getting news from social media. Look at the links and the sources. A well-written news story will have links either in the text of the story or at the bottom of the page or both for you to follow and to investigate for yourself. Look for questionable quotes and photos. Photos that don't belong with the stories they accompany is a very common feature of disinformation. We see that a lot on the web today. Beware of confirmation bias. We'll talk about confirmation bias here in just a minute, but just know that we are all prone to confirmation bias. Search if other news outlets are reporting on the story. If it's an important story that would affect a lot of people and only one outlet is talking about it, that should raise some red flags for you. And think before you share. Ask yourself, why am I sharing this before you do that? All good recommendations to live by in the internet age. One very important practice for all of us to get in the habit of to attain digital literacy is lateral reading. Rather than sticking with just one source, click away from that article and see what other news outlets are reporting on that story. Lateral reading will enable you to have a much more well-rounded understanding of any news story you might want to investigate. And for our instructors who are with us, there's some great lessons in this link from the Stanford History Education folks. You can create a free account and then download these lessons. They've got lessons on lateral reading resources and practice, lateral reading versus vertical reading, lateral reading with Wikipedia, lateral reading with news stories, and lateral reading with fact-checking organizations. Highly recommended free resources for teachers right there. And here's some more information on those. You can see those a little bit better on this slide. Confirmation bias. Okay. Confirmation bias occurs from the direct influence of desire on beliefs. When people would like a certain idea or concept to be true, they end up believing it to be true. Once we've formed a view, we embrace information that confirms that view while rejecting information that casts doubt on it. Confirmation bias can also be found in anxious individuals who view the world as dangerous. Well, psychologists tell us that confirmation bias is a key factor in the information pollution phenomenon. Once we've formed a view on a subject, we really don't like to revisit that decision. We just look for information that confirms what we already believe. And I think the third bullet point is really important on this slide. Confirmation bias can be found in anxious individuals. As with the fake news pandemic story of 1942 that we looked at, we again see anxiety playing a role in the spread of disinformation and the tendency for many individuals to believe that bad information. So in effect, confirmation bias can be a way to attempt to control anxiety. This is a really fascinating book that I highly recommend to you, students and instructors alike, The Misinformation Age, How False Beliefs Spread. Professors O'Connor and Weatherall argue in this book that rather than individual psychology, what matters most and what we believe to be true depends upon who we know. Social forces are the most powerful factors in this arena, they argue from their research. The authors suggest that existing legal frameworks be applied to limit the spread of damaging propaganda on social media. The First Amendment gives us broad protections for free speech, but we do limit some speech. For example, prohibitions on cigarette advertising on television have been around since 1970. Prior to that, cigarette ads were on TV all the time, which just sounds crazy to us now. The authors here propose similar sanctions on information pollution on the web. This is a bust of the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He was the first great thinker to formally study logic. Students, you may or may not have a class in your academic career that provides an opportunity for you to study logical fallacies. If you don't have a class that discusses them, I urge you to learn about them on your own. They are invaluable tools. Once you study them a bit, you can easily spot logical fallacies in all kinds of information you encounter. And here are two common logical fallacies on this slide, courtesy of the Purdue OWL website. The ad hominem fallacy, or against the man fallacy. This is an attack on the character of a person rather than their opinion or arguments. And the example we have here says, Greenpeace's strategies aren't effective because they're all lazy, dirty hippies. That's attacking the people rather than any argument they might make. Circular argument fallacy. This restates the argument rather than actually proving it. Example, John Doe is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. Argument just winds up in the same place that it started. Two more very common logical fallacies that we see in social media postings every day. We've all heard people say, that's a slippery slope. Very common. The flawed logic is, if A happens, eventually B, C, D, and all the way to X, Y, Z will happen. If we ban Hummers because they're bad for the environment, eventually the government will ban all cars. Therefore, we should not ban Hummers. Banning Hummers is not the same as banning all cars. The either-or fallacy. This is a conclusion that oversimplifies the argument by reducing it to only two sides or choices. And our example here is we can either stop using cars or destroy the earth. Well, there are all kinds of points in between those. There are more than just two possibilities there. So get to know your logical fallacies. They will help arm you with invaluable knowledge in your efforts to better evaluate information. And after you've studied them for a while, you can read the comments section on any contentious political Facebook post, and you will see fallacies in just about every comment. Unlike information we get from fake news, information pollution, or other amateur writings on the web, professional journalists are beholden to a set of principles in their work. I learned these principles as a high school journalism student. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer high school students study journalism today, and one result of that is that fewer and fewer people understand how journalism and journalists work, and fewer understand the role of the news media in a free society just in general. And here are the most important of those principles. Accuracy. Nothing else matters if reporters don't get the story right. Student journalists are taught from the very beginning the importance of accuracy. And there are consequences if reporters don't get the story right. Papers have to print retractions when they blow it. It's very damaging to a reporter's career if they get the story wrong. Conversely, probably no one on Facebook is ever going to print a retraction or apologize for sharing false information. Independence. To be truly free, the free press must be free from external controls like state control, or business interest, or market forces. Impartiality. Opinion pieces, editorials are different, but straight news stories should exhibit no prejudice to any ideology. Integrity. Professional journalists are taught to take their obligation to the public extremely seriously. Harm minimization. Journalists must always remember that they are dealing with human lives. The potential for good must always outweigh the potential for harm. Engagement ensures that journalism remains open, accessible, collaborative, and participatory. Accountability. Accountability is essential to the ethical practice of journalism and the maintenance of the public trust. And a couple of things to know about journalism and accountability. Some people think that information from an anonymous source is the same thing as a rumor, that no one knows the source of the information. And that's not true. The reporters working on the story certainly know who the source is, and so do the editors that the reporter reports to. Every newspaper has very prescribed rules for using anonymous sources. Without information from anonymous sources, there would be important information that would never make its way to the public. Another important point to know is that large newspapers have a staffer called an ombudsman. The ombudsman is responsible for checking the work of their reporters and making sure that reporting is done accurately and ethically. Fact checkers offer us great assistance in our efforts to evaluate information. Factcheck.org is great for checking the veracity of political stories. FactCheck stated goal is to reduce the level of deception and confusion in US politics. They call themselves a consumer advocate for voters. PolitiFact.com is another good one. It comes to us from the Tampa Bay Times. And here journalists check statements made by various politicians, they do research on them, and then they assign those statements a point on the truthometer, rating from true to pants on fire lie. And here are a couple of examples of false statements made by a couple of the current presidential candidates on PolitiFact.com. Biden's plan is a 14% tax hike on middle-class families. That is a false statement. Senate Republicans moved to confirm Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court in an election year is not constitutional. That is also a false statement. OpenSecrets.org is a very useful site because it tracks the money in politics. If you've ever wondered who the major donors are for a given candidate, this site has that information for you. It can be very expensive to run for political office in the United States, so tracking the money in politics can be very important. OpenSecrets.org also tracks the activity of lobbying groups. This is a fact checker that journalists use all the time. This article on factcheck.org addresses the terrible wildfires Australia suffered last winter. Climatologists blamed the fires largely on climate change. Some others, though, said that arsonists were responsible for the fires. You all have probably heard some people say, fact checkers are great, but who's fact checking the fact checkers? Well, the answer to that question is we all can fact check the fact checkers. That's the whole point. Their work must be transparent and traceable to show the truth behind false news stories. These are the sources at the bottom of the page of this fact-checking article on the sources of the Australian wildfires. There are more links to follow in the body of the story. I counted more than 20 links. That's 20 sources for this article. It takes some time to follow the links and read the information the fact-checking article is based on, but we all have the opportunity to do so if we wish. And we live in a complicated world. There are really no shortcuts. If we want to understand the complicated issues facing us, we really have to put in the time to read about these complicated subjects extensively. So let's turn now to some good sources for voter and election information. One great source is our local big newspapers like the Dallas Morning News and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. As you can see from this screenshot of the Dallas Morning News election voter guide, you can type in your address, click Build My Ballot, and the website will provide detailed information on every race you are eligible to vote in. Customers have to pay for digital subscriptions to many online newspapers these days, but luckily for TCC students, faculty, and staff, we all can access the Dallas Morning News and Fort Worth Star-Telegram through the library databases. There is a lag of a couple of days to be aware of, though, before it'll appear in the database. Your library databases are a great source of information. The databases are free to access and use for students, faculty, and staff. You can log in with your web advisor credentials. They feature articles from thousands of magazines, journals, and newspapers. And just so you know, the Tarrant County College District pays around $500,000 a year, every year, so that we can have access to these great information resources. Students, your tuition and fees help to go pay for these databases. They're your databases. Your teachers like the information that you cite from them, so please take advantage of them. And you can find them just at library.tccd.edu. Local news outlets, newspapers, and TV stations will always have late-breaking election news first, and also have the most complete information about voting requirements for your state. And here's an example of the detailed information you'll find in voting guides and local papers. Voter ID requirements for us here in the state of Texas. More info on Texas voter ID requirements. If you can't obtain the 7 from the previous slide, you can still cast a ballot by signing a reasonable impediment declaration and providing one of these items. Allsides.com, pictured here, is a valuable resource for us for the election and for news in general. It has links to articles from the left, right, and center. On their topics page, articles on a single subject are grouped side by side, so you can easily read from left, center, and right sources in order to develop a more well-rounded opinion on any particular news topic. And here's a free great resource for us, LibGuides. LibGuides are online research guides built by your librarians, and your TCC librarians have built a lot of them for you. This very thorough and informative guide was created by Terry Rogers, one of our public service librarians on the Northwest campus. This guide is filled with information. Hopefully you've registered. The deadline for that was October 5. But this guide has lots of information on what's on the ballot, ID requirements, and a whole lot more. There are lots of LibGuides created by your TCC librarians on lots of subjects. And this one on voter information is a very good one indeed. The Associated Press is a great source for election and voter information and just news in general. The Associated Press was founded in 1846. Its members are newspapers and broadcasters around the country. The smartphone app is very useful and I highly recommend it. You can download it for free. Here's a screenshot from the app from my phone. The website and app have a feature they call Not Real News. It's a weekly roundup published every Friday of fake news stories and doctored photos that were widely shared that week on social media. Of course, a lot of those fake stories right now are about the election, so this is a great source of election information as well. There's also a dedicated election hub on the site and a smartphone app. And here's an example of false election info that circulated on Twitter and that the AP addressed in Not Real News. There was a claim on social media that while hospitalized, President Donald Trump said, quote, "The doctors said they've never seen a body kill the coronavirus like my body. They tested my DNA and it wasn't DNA, it was USA." The facts are there's no evidence that Trump made such a statement. The president shared an update on his condition in a video message posted to Twitter on Saturday after testing positive for the coronavirus and being transported to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. A screenshot from the video was shared online with a false caption that included the quote. And the post was shared thousands of times on Twitter and Facebook. Here is another one from the October 2nd edition of Not Real News. The claim was a photo of mail bins and envelopes on the side of the road showed discarded ballots found in states such as California, Texas, and Pennsylvania. The facts are the photo does not show ballots. It shows mail bins and envelopes abandoned by a mail carrier in New Jersey who suddenly quit in 2018. Still, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram users this week shared a photo of plastic mail bins and envelopes piled on the side of the road as alleged proof of voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. A reverse image search for the picture shows it appeared at least as early as September 30th, 2018, when it was posted on Facebook by a user with the caption, "If you're looking for your mail, it may be on River Road by 36th Street Station. Share this post. People's information is out on the street." The post was tagged in Pennsauken, New Jersey. And here's another good example of photos being used to deceive. And reverse image searches are a great way to reveal that kind of deception. The Sift. The Sift is a weekly newsletter published by the News Literacy Project. Like the Associated Press, it publishes a weekly rundown of fake and misleading news stories from all over the web. This site is especially useful for teachers because it features potential classroom discussion questions and learning activities that go along with the debunking of fake news. This is from the newsletter back in April of this year. This post on Facebook incorrectly claimed people should wear their masks differently depending on if they're sick with the virus or not. White side out when you're not sick, colored side out if you are sick. Completely wrong, but we can see from the screenshot that this post got some thumbs up and some shares by the time this screenshot was captured. This is a good example of the potential cost of shared misinformation or disinformation. We really don't know in this case if it was purposeful or not. Bad medical advice can get you and others around you killed. Serious business. Another good election resource. I think this one's really cool. This is a screenshot of the live voter turnout wait time dashboard for Tarrant County. This is a clickable map that shows the estimated wait times at early voter locations all across Tarrant County. You can see that when I made this screenshot on October 15th, the estimated wait time at the polling place on the Northwest campus was 30 to 44 minutes. This is a great interactive tool to help you plan where and when you want to cast your ballot. And I've saved, I think, the best voter information resource for last, the League of Women Voters. This organization was formed in 1920, 6 months before the 19th Amendment was ratified, and women in the United States won the right to vote. Its principal goal was to help women be better informed in their new role as voters. In 1944, at the request of President Franklin Roosevelt, they created a campaign to publicly support the establishment of the United Nations. In the 1950s, the LWV became involved in voter education. In the 1970s, they worked to support the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. The organization has had a web presence since the early 1990s when they established www.votefor11.org, and the site is still active today. 2020 marks the LWV's 100th anniversary, and this text from their website says a lot, and I quote, "February 14th, 2020 marks 100 years that the League of Women Voters has empowered voters and defended democracy. Over the last century, we fought for election protection, democratic reforms, and equal access to the ballot, all while maintaining our commitment to nonpartisanship and fostering an informed electorate." They have proven to be very serious about their commitment to nonpartisanship, and that is one of the big reasons that they provide such a valuable resource. The other link on this slide too has some interesting information on how to judge a candidate. It goes into a lot of features and that you don't find on other sites. That's a really good link to check out as well. And on this slide, here's a quick recap of my recommended election and voter information resources for any teachers that might be interested. The League of Women Voters Guide, the Associated Press Not Real News, the Associated Press Election Hub, the Sift from the News Literacy Project, Dallas Morning News Voter Guide, the TCC library databases, and the live voter turnout wait time dashboard. One more bit of advice I want to share with you before we get to the very end, and it's this. Don't fall prey to information fatigue. Here's a definition for us. Apathy, indifference, or mental exhaustion arising from exposure to too much information, especially in later use, stress induced by the attempt to assimilate excessive amounts of information from the media, the internet, or at work. Our information landscape today is complicated. It takes a lot of work to stay on top of the news and to separate fact from fiction, but we have to do it if we want to live in a healthy democracy. It would be easy to say, it's just too difficult to find the truth anymore. I'm going to leave that to someone else. But we can't, not if we want to solve the problems we face. The trolls are counting on us giving up. That's their goal. The Internet Research Agency and all the other foreign actors hostile to the United States want us to give up. They want to demoralize us. Don't let it happen to you. Don't give in to cynicism and apathy. I've been a news junkie since I was a high school journalism student, and I get information fatigue sometimes. You may have information fatigue just from this presentation. I hope not, but it's entirely possible. I handle my information fatigue by taking the weekend off, skipping the news on Saturday and Sunday, and just doing relaxing things that I enjoy for a couple of days. First thing Monday morning, I go right back at it again. And I urge you to find your own way to stay on top of the news and still find a way to fight information fatigue. Use the techniques we've talked about here. Don't expect to learn anything from memes on Facebook. Use fact-checking sites. Practice lateral reading. Turn to the work of professional journalists to learn what's really happening, to separate real information from information pollution. The truth is knowable. You can find it, and your vote counts. In closing, here are a few thoughts about the importance of democratic elections. Barack Obama said, "You wouldn't let your grandparents pick your playlist. Why would you let them pick your representative who's going to determine your future?" Abraham Lincoln said, "The ballot is stronger than the bullet." Larry Sabato, political scientist at the University of Virginia, said, "Every election is determined by the people who show up." The thought and writings of the ancient Greeks are the foundation of all of our democratic traditions and ideals. So I'll give the last word to our friend Aristotle. If liberty and equality, as is thought by some, are chiefly to be found in democracy, they will be best attained when all persons alike share in the government to the utmost. Democracy works best when we all participate. So please take this tip from Aristotle. Arm yourself with good information and vote. If you'd like to learn more about any of these subjects, or if I can help you better use the library's resources, please email me. It's james.baxter@tcc.edu. Thank you. Have a great day. If you haven't done so yet, get out and vote. And the next slide has a QR code that you can scan for those students who are getting extra credit for this class. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Hi, Jim. This is Angela Morse again. We have some questions for you, but first I want to apologize to all the attendees who experienced some technical issues. I did some research. It looks like Microsoft 365 was having a lot of issues this afternoon, and so people were having problems logging in with their TCC addresses. It wasn't recognizing them. So also instructors, if you have students saying they weren't able to get in, that is actually probably true. Even the producers were having problems getting on earlier. So our first question for you, Jim, is what can we consider the biggest polluters of information? And you're muted.
Here we go. How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
The biggest information polluters, I think, are the news websites, the fake news websites that are created just to fool people. As we discussed, disinformation is a lot darker and worse than just misinformation. There's a good guide, a good Google Doc that you can find online from a professor named Melissa Zimders. She's a communications professor at Merrimack College. And she created this document that lists just hundreds and hundreds of fake news websites. If you just do a search for Melissa Zimders, you can find that. In that Google Doc, I think there's some things that probably don't belong there. She created it in the beginning just to share with a few of her colleagues, and it kind of went viral, and a lot of people kind of stuck their fingers into it, as they do with Google Docs. And so I don't think everything in that Google Doc really belongs there, but she categorizes bad information sites. She categorizes them by, fake news, satire, or just, biased sites. She gives a lot of information in that Google Doc. So I would look for Melissa Zimders, and you'll see just hundreds and hundreds of fake news sites. Satire sites, I mean, everybody knows about, theonion.com, but there are a lot of satire sites out there with names like the Alabama Reporter. And a lot of people don't know that they're satire sites. They go to them and they think that they're reading real news. There's a site you can check out called factitious.net that I use with classes sometimes. It's really interesting because it's set up in kind of a game show format, and it gives you real news articles and fake news articles. You read the article and you have to guess whether you think it's fake news or real news. And it's quite surprising sometimes, what turns out to be fake news. So check out factitious.net too. But for running down kind of a list of fake news websites, that Melissa Zimders, Zimdars Google Doc is a really good way to go. And if that's not enough info for you on that, email me, james.baxter@tcc.edu, and I can share more information with you about that.
Okay. Next question is, what are the motivations for having clickbait titles? I've always been curious about that.
The clickbait titles, it's just the advertising. Back in the old days when I was a student journalist and when I worked for newspapers, we were limited by offset printing technology. You had a certain space for a headline, and you had to fit that headline into the space that you were provided. And the result was headline writing was an art. UIL competitions had headline writing as one of the contests. I was a pretty good headline writer. I won some awards for headline writing. But today with the web, that's not an issue. But the issue with headlines now is that very often there's so much competition for your attention and your eyeballs on the web that rather than really describing a story accurately, they'll create a crazy clickbait headline to get you to click on that article, so that you go and you see the whole article, you scroll down the whole page, and you see all the ads. And every time that you click, the advertisers know it. The more clicks that an ad garners, or that an article with ads garners, the more money they get paid. So the connection between news and advertising is a lot more mercantile than it used to be. And that's why clickbait headlines and clickbait photos and just clickbait stories in general create so much of a problem for us. They're really just pushing advertising. Advertising and the news have always been married together, but it's a little more of a problem Well, it's a lot more of a problem now than it used to be in the old days. So we have to kind of take those clickbait headlines with a grain of salt. I hope that answers that one.
Yes, I think it did. It looks like we don't have any more. Oh, looks like one just came in. Since mainstream news media sources such as CNN, Fox News, MSNBC create their own narrative to breaking news, besides the Associated Press, is there any other news sources that don't report from a left or right point of view?
Yeah, I think any good newspaper, any newspaper of any size that is professional at all, certainly their straight news stories are going to be pretty much right down the middle. And you can test that looking at kind of the adjectives that are used in stories. Look at the way that things are described. But most big city newspapers, I mean, the editorial section is different. And this is another area where it used to be a little easier to separate fact from opinion. You know, in the old newspapers, in the old days, the editorials were in a separate section. Now, when you go to, you know, a newspaper's website, it's sometimes they're separated, sometimes they're all kind of in there together. And it's kind of hard to tell sometimes what's intended to be straight news and what's an opinion piece. But the straight news articles in any, you know, decent sized, you know, newspaper, the straight news is, they're at least trying to kind of hit it down the middle, unless it's stated, you know, unless it's stated as an information source that comes from the left or the right. You know, if they're trying to be a mainstream news source, their straight news is going to be pretty down the middle. And that allsides.com is a nice way to judge that. You can see stories from the left, center, and right kind of all in one place.
All right. Another question we have: why are news anchors for national news media outlets not held accountable for spreading disinformation when they cut video clips short to distort a narrative in their favor and not give viewers full context?
Well, they should be. I guess I would need to see an example of what the questioner is talking about there. You would have to see an example, because, you know, if they're editing videos to deceive, that's certainly not how it should be. But then anytime you show a video, unless you're showing the complete video from start to finish, you know, there's got to be some editing process. If, say, for an example, you know, it's an interview with a politician and the interview was 60 minutes long, if you're watching the, you know, 5:30 p.m. national news and the whole newscast is only 30 minutes, obviously they can't take up the whole newscast. So there has to be some editing, there has to be some decision on what's the important part of that video to show. But the intent should be to capture the spirit, you know, of any interview overall. If, and it does happen, if they're trying to push a certain narrative and they just show you, if they take things out of context, they most certainly should be held accountable. And you can do that as a private citizen. You can write to them, let them know that you know, you don't appreciate the manipulation, if that is indeed what's going on.
All right, I think that was our last question. If you could show the last slide of your PowerPoint again so the students can grab those QR codes.
Sure thing. Let's see.
And I think we're going to leave this available to log in for 24 hours for students that were not able to log in due to technical issues, so that they can access the recording. And they'll also be able to sign in with that QR code to get credit for their classes. Again, we apologize for technical issues, but there's nothing we can do to fix Microsoft.
Well, Well, thank you guys for the very interesting questions. It's a great discussion. Love to talk to you more about the news media and digital literacy. If there are folks who have questions who didn't get to ask them, or if you watch this recording later and therefore didn't have a chance to ask a question, please just send me an email. I would love to discuss these topics with you. Just james.baxter@tccd.edu.
All right, well, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.